Welcome to the Great Indoors, the podcast series where we discuss the technological and cultural impact that the COVID 19 pandemic and accompanying lockdown has had on our daily lives and society. You can subscribe to our podcast on all good podcast channels, be it Apple, Google, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And please check out our website, amdocs.com/, the Great Indoors, where we host many accompanying assets to support our discussions. My name is Matt Roberts, and today we are at episode 8, and we will be talking about culture, more specifically, youth culture, known as Generation Z. Gen Z, for short, is the demographic cohort succeeding millennials and preceding Generation Alpha. Popular media uses the mid to late 1990s as the starting birth years and the early 2010s as the ending birth years. Most members of Gen Z are the children of Gen X, Generation X, and sometimes even lucky millennials. But most members of Gen Z have used digital technology since a young age and are comfortable with the internet and social media. This generation has been characterized in the media as probably the most anxious and depressed. And some commentators attribute these effects to the generation having grown up in a time of digital social media interaction, smartphones, and even this pandemic. Now, Franklin Roosevelt once said, "We cannot always build a future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." But what happens when that building process stops and those building blocks are torn down? The implications that the pandemic has had on this demographic will determine the future, and that's why it's so important. I'd like to welcome our guest for today. His name is Clint Runge. Clint is the founder and managing director of Arch Rival, which is a youth culture agency that reinvents how brands win the hearts and minds of young adults. Clint and his team light the fires for clients such as Red Bull, Adidas, Hollister, and Spotify by going against the grain of traditional marketing to build brand love, loyalty, and sales with teens to 20 somethings, which is the Generation Z sort of demographic cohort. So while he's the kind of guy who likes Diet Mountain Dew and card tricks, his saving grace is that he does great creative. He's won as many awards as he's had all-nighters, leading Arch Rival to an Ad Age Agency of the Year and Inc. 1000 company. Most frightening of all, Runge taught creative strategy at the University of Nebraska for 15 years. And lastly, and we can test this at the end if you like, Clint, he considers himself a professional rock, paper, scissors athlete and welcomes your challenge at archrival.com. So, Clint, welcome to the Great Indoors.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great.
And where are you today, Clint? Where are you enjoying the Great Indoors today?
Yeah, today I am in Lincoln, Nebraska, which may sound like an odd place to be after everything you just read, but Lincoln, Nebraska is actually a pretty exciting, interesting hidden gem, and I love being here.
Nice. Excellent. How's the weather there today? I'm British. I have
We,
to talk about the weather. This is the thing.
well, I think we're on our last week of hot summer, and we're about ready to enter the beginning of fall, which around here is beautiful.
Nice, nice, excellent, excellent. So, thanks for joining, Clint. I think, as this podcast has progressed over the weeks, we've touched on some really interesting topics. And I think today we're going to talk about culture, specifically youth culture, and that demographic segment known as Gen Z. So just to refresh our listeners, we have in this series looked at how people's usage of technology has changed, particularly amongst adults. We've looked at the effect of education, and we had some very young guests to talk about that. We talked about mental health and other societal issues that this pandemic has impacted. But Clint, from your perspective, when the pandemic first hit, what was the impact on that Gen Z youth group?
Well, if you think about the impact it had on us, right, just everyone in general, it was pretty startling, right? I mean, the world seemed to come to a halt, and in many ways, other generations were a little more prepared for it. And what I mean by that is that we have, if I think about myself as a Gen Xer or even older millennials, and certainly older generations as boomers, their social structures are in place. They know who their friends are. Their careers are, they know where their career's headed, or for the most part, they understand what their skills and opportunities lie, and they know, they kind of know the routine. They know how to survive. They know how to get around. So when the world stops, although it's impacted all of us, and we've all had to scramble and deal with things, we had the social networks in place that we could handle it. For Gen Z, you think about the oldest of them, which
Mhm.
have been, let's just call them graduating college, all the way through high school, and in their teen years. That's like a time of life where you're really forming your identity. You're trying to figure out who you are. And so when the world stops and
Yeah,
they're no longer able to figure out their
yeah.
identity, search for what they're good at, find the new opportunities that would lead to them understanding themselves better. They are in the mode of trying, going to university or getting an internship, and all these opportunities to meet new people, start my career, maybe even get into university. Ah, the impact to them has been almost insurmountable. And when we first talked about this with our clients, we talked about this as their dreams were literally disrupted. And I remember talking to one young adult. He was just graduating university, and he had an internship lined up at Urban Outfitters. And he had this big vision of himself in the fashion world, and all the ambitions and dreams in the world. And then suddenly that internship, which was the key step for him to do that, gone. Right? They canceled it, and that has been repeated over and over and over again. I'm
Mhm.
sure you've heard
Yeah.
those stories as well.
Well, I think the big story that I saw last week, I think being British originally, was in the United Kingdom. They do, the exams they do that get them into university at the age of 18 are known as A levels. Now, because they couldn't sit their A levels, an algorithm was produced that gave them a forecast
Ugh.
of what those A levels were, and it turned out to be an absolute scandal, an absolute disaster.
Was there any other outcome to that? I mean, for Gen Z and Gen X or parents, no way are they going to stand for that. I saw that same thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely awful, and like you said, this is I remember when I was, that age and, wanting to get my grades to go to university. That's a pivotal moment in your life, a pivotal moment, and, yeah, and this happened in the UK, and it destroyed a lot of people are still absolutely distraught, so the effects of this, would you say that this is the most impacted demographic by this crisis, based on that?
I think so. I think so, because if you go to the next generation below them, which is Gen Alpha, they're in the family unit, so
Mhm.
their structures are in place.
Yeah,
Another way I've been thinking about this, and by the way, I just want to comment on that story. It's crazy because everything that Gen Z desires and wants is that they are in control of their destiny,
yeah,
and that they have all the opportunity in front of them to get what they've earned. And then something like that, where a algorithm steps in front of that and says, no, 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 we're going to predetermine, or what is based on your previous experience, determine what your outcome would have been, even if it was exactly accurate. And let's just give it the benefit of the doubt.
yeah,
Uh, that goes against the moral DNA of Generation Z. So there's no way that that was ever going to stand. If you just understood Gen Z,
yeah,
that is not going to land. And then you'd add the Gen Xer parents into the mix, who are going to be like, who are all about screw the system,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
have that against the man sort of thing.
yeah.
Like, there's no way they're going to stand for that either. But oh, I even forgot where we were going with that. Where was the question? Where'd you leave me off at?
I said, is that the most impacted demographic by this crisis?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think absolutely, because of all the big moments that happen, and that's been
Yeah,
forever true. Your teen moments, your first years of getting into adulthood,
yeah,
which might be look like university, it might be your career. Those are, that's the groundwork for the almost for the rest of your life,
yeah,
and you know that as an adult looking back, but in that moment, I mean, you're absolutely
yeah.
lost.
And you got me nostalgic now. You got me reminiscing back to that age where I was 18. I did my A levels and then I moved. I left home to go to university. I moved pretty much all the way down to London in the UK. It was my first time leaving home. And there was that feeling of independence, proving yourself, but also friendship as well. You build your strongest friendships at that age, right? And I saw a study from Oxford University that was on the BBC yesterday, and it said as a result of the pandemic, people are polarizing their friend. They're losing their friends that were like marginal friends So your friendship groups are shrinking down. And I imagine for this segment, that's I mean, this is massive, right, on what it means to people.
So we may assume that Gen Z is overly connected and has all these relationships, but we've always known there's different tiers to them. And in this moment, there is, when we talk to young adults, and we do quite a few studies, they would tell you, even though they're the most connected and by appearances have all their friends, they're lonely. And a lot of that has to do with, and they would even tell you they've lost friends,
Yeah.
partly because of the pandemic, which has turned into a divisive, mask debate, so to speak. You either wear masks or you don't, um, and they've had some friends where they've just parted different ways, and then you add in the social justice fires that have percolated during this time, and between all of that, yeah, they would tell you
Yeah.
that they've
Yeah.
lost a lot of friends, and in many ways are feeling the effects of loneliness, and that's a danger on top of a generation that was already suffering from mental health issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now we talked then as well about all through this podcast series we've tried to really focus on the positives of technology, and we started off with the negativity that algorithm could cause this particular demographic. But what positive role do you think has technology played for them during since March to today?
Well, there's certainly been a lifeline. I will say that, and there is a lot of negativity out there, and even amongst their forms of communication and on social media networks and the various platforms, there is a lot of negativity out there. They refer to it as the doom scroll, right? Where it's just like one negative thing after another in the feed, and that adds up. That said, I will tell you that this generation's pretty adept to finding the good things too. So for people who are frustrated with
Mm.
that, and you turn on your television and you're streaming and you get bad news, you look at your social media, there's people fighting, they have found good news within that, and that comes from various influencers, various channels, celebrities starting their own thing, but I would say there is this wave of positivity that this generation has tapped into, and that's absolutely because of tech.
And I'm going a bit off. Well, maybe I'm not going off topic here, but one of the other things that we've always said is that the seismic effects of the lockdown and pandemic. We compare it. I mean, the last time there was something this magnitude was probably World War II, right? Really, when you look at women coming into the workplace like they did during that time, when you look at Gen Z, if they existed as they are today, were the ones that typically went away to war, right? This affected that age group. This has parallels. And what do you think the long term effects are on the Gen Z as a result? I mean, and this thing we don't even know. I mean, this thing could last for another 12 months for all we know. But what are you thinking? What are you thinking right now could happen?
Yeah, and to be fair, it could be one after another, right? Now will we live in fear of every new virus that comes along that maybe have always percolated, but we've never been aware of it the way that now we have media to alert us to it. So who knows when the this particular pandemic ends, or even just hysteria around health lasts. I also compare it to 9/11, which although was an American event, it was a global um, reaction. And in a lot of ways, the way that we've adapted security minded to everything now, it's like you're going to a concert, of course there's security. Of course, you're going to a new building, of course there's security. At first, that was a very disruptive system. Okay. But now it's just like, of course, you got to have security. I think in the future, we're just going to have, of course, you're going to have health measures in place as well. Of course, people are going to have different screening procedures to enable to do X, Y, Z. And in many ways, we'll look back and be like, how did we ever do it without that? I think that's what will happen from this.
Yeah.
For this age group in particular, this might be a defining thing for them. I, in fact, this generation starts with 9/11. If you were 5 or 6 years old when 9/11 happened, you become part of Generation Z. And this might be kind of an interesting midpoint for their lives in some ways, that this now is also taking the cursor. And where this ends up, I think it's going to set them back quite a bit in their career. Stanford University did a pretty deep study on the impact of when you graduate into a job mad market. You're taking a lower paid job. You're not taking the job that you probably would otherwise, or even in your industry, and so it sets you back about 10 years. So financially and even just like passions and ambitions wise. We will see a ton of new startups though instead of it. So there's
Hmm.
something to come from that. And this generation was already evolving to be great leaders. Just it's in their DNA. This sort of self-starter attitude. I think that we're going to get even better leaders than we would have because they'll have learned at an early age how to endure something like this, which is both polarizing, it is scary, and it is challenging in all the ways. And they're going to come out on top of this and have some real life skills at an early age. They're probably going to enter into politics faster than other generations because they'll have this know-how and ambition and probably a case study on how to do it, how to overcome the mountains. So actually, I'm really looking forward to. I think there'll be some negative effects. I mentioned that the mental health one. I think there's going to be a ton of positive things that come from it too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when we go back to this was an interesting one that came up in an earlier podcast where Anthony Guttenlecki, our CTO, he said, what amazes me, he says, my mother is using online banking now because she has to use online banking, right? There's no other choice. So we were seeing this democratization of digital, right? And we're seeing this race to digital. So, from your research with Gen Z, how are they? What are they doing digitally different, more or less of, given this pandemic that you can see?
Well, they were certainly set up for this, right? I mean, when we talk about the adaptations that we've all had to make, we're really talking about we're reverting back to where companies are making technology for, which is generally going to be youth culture. So,
Yeah,
which is kind of our sweet spot of business futures. So, in a lot of ways, they were set up technologically for this. Um, I would say they have a lot of frustrations though with it as well. You just mentioned, someone else now has to use online baking, and I would say there's a lot of systems though that we're not ready for this moment, particularly in education, where we talk to them and they talk a lot about just imagine you're a boomer professor who's always taught in the class, suddenly now has to teach the same lecture on Zoom.
yeah,
They're just not prepared for it. The material's not designed that way. They're not wired that way. They're uncomfortable. Everything's from, and so the lessons aren't as good. The education has value, and they would say, actually, I don't think I want to learn from this professor, this university, or this manner anymore. So I think there's been some pullback in some categories where businesses were not ready for it.
yeah. It's interesting when we talk about businesses as well. When the lockdown first came in, and this is on our website, there was this video on YouTube. You might have seen it, where it looked at all the TV commercials that were released by brands following the lockdown and the world stopping. And they were all the same.
Oh,
They
I
all
did see
said the
that.
same things, right? You did see this, yeah.
Yes.
They all said the same things. They had the same imagery. It was messages about togetherness, reassurance. We have a long-standing heritage, this company. It was like there was some sort of algorithm just banging out these
Hmm.
TV ads, and everything looked the same. So now, what is something that brands should do now moving forward, do you think, with regards the messages, with regards what they're saying, particularly to Gen Z?
Okay.
What are they receptive to?
All right. It's been a wild couple months and at the beginning of this. I would say the reason all of those sounded a lot alike, it has a lot to do with cancel culture, which is if we say the wrong thing, if we do the wrong thing in this moment, and we were seeing plenty of examples of this where
Yeah,
consumers would just say, "We're done with you. You're not treating people the right way. You're not acting in accordance to what we believe how the world should act, and so we're canceling you," which has its own conversation we can get to if it's even effective. But this generation, for brands in particular, if you were to ask them how I want to change the world, I want to impact the world, how do you do that? Do you do it through government? If you look in the last 20 years, I mean, all you're going to see when they've been raised, has government actually changed culture for them? Not in the way it did for other generations. Who's actually moved the needle? Google, Amazon, right? Uber,
mm,
Airbnb, YouTube. These are like it's brands, it's businesses that have changed culture. Apple revolutionized their lives. So when they want to make an impact, they now look
mm,
at brands to be the avenue in which they do that. So that's why you get that cancel culture. If you're not acting in accordance to how we want to change the world, then we're going to react to you in a negative way. So brands have to listen to that. The issue is, and we work with a lot of clients, a lot of brands, brand clients, that they got into business to make money. I mean, that's why we started any of this stuff, right? It's about business,
Yeah.
and those businesses got very good at making money. But now they're asked to not just lead in terms of your output being money. You are also now, as a brand, being asked to be a moral authority, and so you must produce ethics along with your goods and services. And many businesses are just not wired that way, to no fault of their own. That wasn't the original structure, and so they're quickly trying to adapt. Um, and then now you add in systemic racism conversations that's
Yeah.
going across
Yeah.
the globe as well, and that's just another point where they're like, are we ready for this? No. And where a lot of the emphasis goes as a reaction to it is to go to their marketing and say, okay, create an
Mm.
image, create a TV spot like you saw that says that we're sensitive, that we're thinking about the future. And I would tell you, for your brands listening, that what Gen Z really wants you to do is to make that part of your DNA, which requires a really deep dive a fundamental change to the business. Some businesses won't be able to do it because those roots are too deep, and they are ripe for disruption because of that. And other businesses will be able to adapt
Yeah.
because of the leadership and because of the structures and opportunities they see in the market.
Yeah, and it was almost when it all happened, from a brand perspective, and it was almost like, well, you can't try and sell anything right now. Now's not the time to sell anything,
Hmm.
right? We just need to tell people we're here and we're there for you. Let's not try and sell anything. So, do you have any examples of not brands that have done well out of this pandemic? Because that doesn't sound right as well. We know that there's, I did really well out of the lockdown. Did you? Excellent. Yeah. No, not that kind of thing. But we see the brands or even the businesses that have suffered the most, namely travel and tourism, have really been smashed. What would be, if you had to just call out a brand, and maybe you don't have to mention them per se, but which brand has handled this correctly from a business perspective, would you say?
Yeah, I think there's a number that have done this well. Um, Someone who always seems to have their pulse on culture and reacts the right way, where culture even ends up, but maybe at the time gets a lot of pushback and almost feels controversial, is Nike.
Yeah,
Nike has done a fantastic job of coming out with the message first, that then seems to be where everyone coalesces over time.
yeah,
And this is their first time. I think
yeah,
because there's something wired in the way they view culture and look at it, that they're ahead of the curve in that way. And so when a pandemic hits, when a social justice fire hits, when a new topic takes over our daily water cooler conversations, they are prepared and understand themselves so well, they know how to talk about it in that moment. Where other businesses are less sure of their brand and how their brand would respond to any crisis. And so they're having to figure that out now in the middle of a fire.
yeah, yeah,
So I look at Nike, another brand that's adapted really well. And I'm sorry, it's another sports analogy, but the NBA has done pretty well.
yeah,
The National Basketball Association here in the U.S. They've done a pretty great job of turning the corner and trying to lead out of it. Of course, there's some stumbling along the way, but in a lot of ways, people are looking at them and saying, is it working? And if it does, a lot of people are going to follow suit, not just in sports, but in business. Um, and I mean that by listening to their employees. I mean that by leading through the pandemic, and also finding a way to endure what could have been a total loss of income. All businesses are facing that, of finding a way to make it happen and seeing if the will of the people will follow.
no, it's really interesting with the NBA, and you can see me. I'm wearing a Raptors hat now.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
notice.
there you
Yeah, look
go.
at you.
There you
Okay.
go. That's the. I think that was a hang up from our last sports conversation with. And I know I have to admit, I think the NBA have embraced a lot of the social unrest issues spectacularly well. They obviously embraced the bubble concept, to keep everybody safe. I know they're all down in Florida. When you look at the NBA, the baseball, it's kind of all over the place, and there's all sorts of things happening. So
Hmm.
I totally get that from a brand positioning perspective. So, what do you think has changed forever? Say in 12 months' time, this is hypothetical, but we like hypothetical. We're 12 months away, 12 months down the line, they
Hmm.
found a vaccine, 70% of people have been vaccinated. and we're moving forward with our lives. What effect will this have on Gen Z, how they position their brands, moving forward from where we were 7 months ago?
Well, to your point, all the expectations that we knew where culture would eventually end up, at least in terms of digital plays, we fast forward. In 6 months' time, we've done 5 to 10 years worth of work. So that I feel good about that. And in that way, I would say that I think the world is equal parts. The future is virtual, and the future is human. So by virtual, I think we all understand that there's going to be a lot more virtual play. There's going to be sensitivity to getting together. The concerts have been happening in Fortnite and other platforms have been incredible. They've worked. I mean, over 10 million viewers. You can't get, if you get 100,000 people to a live concert, you're doing pretty well. So things have worked. But I would also say that what will endure is humanity. And what I mean by that is that when we talk to our young adults, and we probably all feel this to some degree, and one of the things I was even really surprised about was how much they missed people. They miss being with their friends. They miss going to school. They miss going to the playing football. They miss going to the concert, shopping, at their favorite retailers. They may miss being with people. So I think there is a danger for brands to swing too virtual and forget that what this is really about, even in the virtual world, is about being together,
Yeah,
humanity, right? And if you also take that term and think about it, it's how we talk about our people, it's how we talk to our consumers. It's being thoughtful, it's being friendly, it's being courteous, it's all those things that you would want in a best friend. I think if we get too virtual and too digital, we're going to lose some of that. I think it is possible to be very virtual and very digital and be human. But I think there's a
yeah.
danger there. And I think those two things are going to persist and last. Now, whether businesses and brands embrace it or not, to be determined.
No, and it takes me. I mentioned that BBC article that referenced this research, and there was a picture in it. Maybe we'll post this on the website afterwards, but it goes back to our sort of, for primates, life depends on being part of a stable group, right? That
Mm,
together, and there's an image here of I'll show it up, but it's a load of like orangutans on a cliff hugging each other. But I think that's what it is. Our primeval instincts are to be part together in a group, physically connected. Sometimes you need a hug, sometimes you need to see your friends. And I think you're right. There's a danger we could swing too virtual, and we need to come back to that. That physical life that we led before. And it makes me think about the travel industry, who have been totally impacted by
mm,
what flights are down by 90% of where they were. Air Canada just posted
mm.
horrendous losses. And I think a lot of businesses are thinking, well, we don't need to get on a plane anymore. Right? Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
We don't need to fly people around the world. But I mean,
And
it
yet, and yet, you and I know that business is better if we're sitting in the same room.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the point
Yeah,
I
we
was
know
gonna
that.
make. That interaction, that human connection makes business better. And I think
Yeah.
you may be saving a few dollars now when you're not flying, you're doing everything virtually, but ultimately we have to go back to some level of connection mentally, right? Mentally,
Hmm.
now there's one other point I wanted to lead on as well, and it's something that we've seen in pretty much every podcast is that not only is there the digital divide, but there's what the whole pandemic has done is shine a light, a microscopic zoom, if you will, on the inequalities in society, right? The people that have been hit hardest are the lower income groups, um, unquestionably. If you look at education, maybe they didn't have access to the laptops and Chromebooks and the internet connections to be able to
Yeah.
educate themselves. They can't keep the connections together on Zoom because they don't have that hardware, even down to medical insurance. And they're the ones that have been disproportionately impacted mentally as well with the mental health issues. I mean, from a cultural perspective, how do you think that reflects back to Gen Z? Is it you definitely seeing, in your research and analysis, that income equality, that the hardest things are hitting those lower income groups much more substantially, right?
100%. Yeah, you're right on. I think it's easy for us in brands and businesses, and even in this podcast, to focus on sort of the haves, which are the people who are, maybe our consumers who are spending money in our businesses. So it's easy for us to focus our attention there. But a lot of times when I talk about the importance of equity with this generation, the biggest one, even beyond money, is, and it's a factor of money, but it's the tech gap. And those that have the ability to continue to learn and be educated and connected and make those relationships that are important to their opportunities, they win.
Yeah,
Okay. And those that do not have those connections or ability to stay educated, learn, and move forward in life, they are literally left behind. So this is a terrible thing. I don't know that we understand the full
yeah,
impact of this, but I read a study of where it was looking at semester by semester. If kids didn't have, if you're in the third grade, which by the way is the age in which is the most important for you, because you go from learning to read for the words, you go to learn to read, you read to learn versus learning to read. And if you don't make that change, you're out, the future of your life is almost trackable. Like
yeah,
it's a different line trajectory. But the study looked at, say, well, if you don't have school for a semester, how far does that put you behind your counterparts? If they would have been, if you would have continued education, and like one semester, it's like, you're behind like about 3 months or so. It's not a big deal. But you start getting into a year, 2 semesters worth, it starts like doubling. It's like 2 and a half years behind. And then if you miss, and if this continues, you miss like a year and a half or 2 years, or it's not the same quality of education, it just gets bigger and bigger. And that's a scary thing that a lot of people are talking about. I'm sure they are in the education circles, but we're not talking about it in the brands and business circles.
yeah,
That has an impact on our future employees, on our future consumers.
yeah.
I mean, think of the money that's going to have to go into resourcing, the second half of this generation. I don't know. It's probably one thing that makes me a little nervous, and maybe it's because I got kids and I think about that stuff a little bit. But that's a big mystery.
My children are around that. My children are grade 4, grade 5, grade 1.
Big years.
Right, it's a pivotal, yeah, a big is. Do you think brands have, I wouldn't say, an obligation, because I think we said it in a podcast. Government policy perhaps has to look at this and look at that, like you said, not just income equality, but that tech inequality amongst different groups. Could brands play a part in that?
Yes, I think, and you see some starts of that already.
Yeah,
Education is like, I've been talking to universities and like, you know, Big Ten, SE. I've been talking to all these universities, and I tell them, you are so ripe for disruption. It's incredible, and this moment may have just triggered it, which is that you, for so long, you've controlled everything, and now you're no longer in control. And what's going to happen is that people are going to look at, well, do I want to waste all this time taking these classes that I may or may not need, when right now I need to have action? And what you're going to see is brand stuff in the space. Remember, it's Apple, Amazon, Google have changed the world. So they're going to look to the brands and say, well, what can you teach me? I think Google's
yeah,
starting their own university. And so if you want to learn how
yeah,
to develop from the best people in the world, you go to Google. Of course you would. You do that in a heartbeat. And I think you're going to see more and more of these bigger brands saying, well, the university systems weren't training our employees anyway well enough. We were having to do most of the heavy lifting. Now, in this moment, when people are worried about being on large campuses, we can create our own systems and structures of education. I think it's very attractive for young adults who are looking for that leg up.
cool. No, absolutely, absolutely. So look, we're going to come to an end soon, but I just wanted to finish, Clint, with your sort of closing thoughts, and what has surprised you the most? What's the one thing that that you've picked up during this pandemic that's impacted what you do with the brands that you work? What's the big rock that's fallen down, from your perspective?
Well, there's two things. The first one is is the humanity issue, where if your brand is no longer your marketing campaign and your identity and your logo. Your brand is how you treat people. It's how you treat your consumers. Like that's the brand. It's all the little decisions. It's what your CEO says. Like all of those things matter far more than your advertising campaign. That's number one. Number two, and brands that embrace that and understand that will win in this moment. Number two is that when the pandemic hit, all our lives, we use the terms, right? Like, is ripped apart from the seam. My life was ripped apart from the seams. And what we mean by that is that all the structure, my routines were broken. So I used to drive to work and I would go get coffee and I could work out even at my, my business. Everything was set up for me. I knew when to drop my kids off. And then suddenly, like, all of that stuff stopped and we didn't have those routines anymore. What's happening now, months later, is we're repackaging our lives up, and now it's happening in new ways. So I've learned to adapt, and now I know where I'm going to order my coffee online. It's going to show up here. I got a subscription for this food item from the restaurant I really love, and here's how our new education is going to work in our household. We've repackaged our life back up. Brands that are active now get to be part of building the new structures of these, being part of these new routines. That
Mhm.
is huge. That is, new habits are being formed when it's like, you should be this so active right now to be part of these new habits and routines. We encourage our brands to get involved now and not wait for the new routines and habits to be completely formed and then feel like you should jump into the game. The opportunities now.
And it's amazing. I'm probably being a bit humorous here, but I was joking about my new routine, right? Because I haven't commuted since March. I would drive to the office. It would take me an hour with Toronto traffic. And I was actually self-analyzing my new routine, right? So this is my new. This is now. I get up at the same time because I have young children, right? But it used to be I get up, shower, quick breakfast in the car, work, do da 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 da. But now, obviously, that early routine is completely changed, right? I haven't. This is going to be probably be too much information. I haven't worn trousers since March. Since March. I haven't had to put a pair. Of course, I'm putting shorts on. I'm not walking around the house naked. That would be really weird. But
It's a good thing this is an audio podcast and not a video one.
no, it absolutely, yeah, absolutely for all, yeah, for everyone, and it's that kind of thing. I don't get my coffee from Tim Hortons. I do it here, right? We
Hmm.
invested in an espresso machine. It's great.
There you
I
go.
come downstairs. I start work earlier because I can,
Huh.
not because I want to. I can, and it's advantageous. But there's such a change to my own when I analyze it, my personal routine. You're absolutely right. This is the time brands should be looking at that and thinking, well, how do we capitalize? How do we really, you know, get in there and cement ourselves into that new routine? It's maybe that's an exercise we should put on the website.
Hmm.
Everyone can document their new routine. Hopefully, it involves starting with getting dressed. Anyway,
Getting dressed, number one.
number one, you have to now get dressed. And if all
Uh,
this thing, I don't know how I'm going to put on a. I'll have to do it when the winter comes here, of course. Wear proper trousers, so that might be quite tricky when we get. So look, Clint, I want to thank you for joining the Great Indoors Day. I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it just as much.
Yeah, it's been great, and we'll speak to you again very soon. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And if you want to know more about Clint's research and analysis on this subject, please visit our website, amdocs.com/the great indoors, where you can download his almanac, The Unknowable Now. It's a great read, really. Check it out. And remember, subscribe to our podcast on all the usual great podcast channels. And we'll see you next time for another episode of The Great Indoors. Thank you very much.